yesterday, maybe the day before, Venerable Chodrak began her session. One of the first teachings was to teach us about the monastic mind. And she started with having a monastic mind benefits our Dharma practice, whether you're monastic or lay practitioners. A monastic mind is one that is humble, imbued with a Buddhist worldview, dedicated to cultivating mindfulness, clear knowing, love, compassion, wisdom, and other good qualities. And the first quality here, of course, is a mind that is humble, the quality of humility. It's not something I'm tremendously endowed with, but I'm working on it. But a person who was tremendously endowed with it was Geshe-la. And I want to speak to him as a model for the monastic mind today. We are extremely fortunate to have the kinds of teachers that we have here. Venerable Chodrak, Venerable Sangye Kadro, now Venerable Gogwang, and I'm going to include you, Venerable Changhwa, who exhibit these qualities of the monastic mind that we can emulate, that we have examples, that we can get a picture of, oh, this is how I can become a monastic. But today, of course, I want to speak specifically to Geshe-la's example and how much we can continue to learn from him. One of the things that was just astonishing to begin with is that Geshe-la was a Geshe-la Rampa. He was the highest of his class. He was an amazing scholar. He was a tremendous teacher. He was respected throughout the entire Tibetan world. And then, when he came here, he was also respected for his scholarship and his wisdom. When Geshe-la came to the Abbey, right away, he attended every teaching that was given here. It's the first thing I saw. Now, our nuns are very good teachers and very well trained, our teacher nuns, but they're nuns. And Geshe-la came to every talk. That wasn't even a question in his mind. And then the first time I was leading a review, I don't remember why I was sitting in this chair, but I was leading a review, and Geshe-la came. Like, even us, he came. And he didn't make faces, and he didn't, correct us. He was totally willing to respond when we referred to him. Geshe-la, I'm not sure about this point. What do you think? But with such grace, he attended every single teaching that was given here without any arrogance of being, well, I'm the Geshe-la Rampa. I know it all. Never. Another quality that he asked for a job. He really wanted to contribute. And we looked around and we thought, now what can Geshe-la do that would... So we gave him the job of wiping the tables after lunch every day, which he loved. He really enjoyed doing it. And he did it with care, and he was so cautious. It took him a long time to do it. And I was astonished one time. I don't know how this came up, but maybe I asked him, how was this job for you? But he said something like, well, I look at the dependent arising of the nature of the table, and I think about the emptiness of the counter. I was stunned. I wipe the tables, and I'm like, who left all the chocolate on the counter? How come there's tea leaves? What is this? Do I think about the emptiness or the dependent arising of the action I'm doing? No. But is that an example that I would like to really try to act? Yes. So that's the difference between a pure mind as opposed to a habitually afflicted mind. And with humility, he did this job every day until Venerable Chodrak finally called to us and said, is this how you want your teachers to be working? And then when he was, Venerable Thubten very respectfully asked him to maybe retire because we had overlooked in his humility that we shouldn't be asking our teachers to wipe the tables. And he was very humble about relinquishing the job too. He didn't say, oh no, I really like it. He just said, yes, thank you. That was kind of the end of it. So when we take refuge in the Sangha, we're taking refuge in this Arya Sangha. We don't know what the quality of Geshe-la's realizations or attainments were. But as a representative of the Sangha, which is a role that we also play as a group of four or more. He certainly was a model to follow. And his mind was definitely imbued with the Buddhist worldview of that, there's no question. And I think many of us are finding a lot of comfort in that when we think about, that he's not with us now. And there's a few words from an article, a review of his that was published in the New York Times in 2020, titled, "How Does a Buddhist Monk Face Death?" And Geshe-la said wisely, he said, "We fear death because we love life, but a little too much, and often look at just the preferred side of it. Particularly," he said, "we insist on seeing life in its incomplete form without death, its inalienable flip side. It's not that we think that death will not come someday, but that it will not happen today or tomorrow, next month, next year, and so on. We fail to see and accept reality as it is, with life in death and death in life." So he went on to say, we can reflect on and contemplate the inevitability of death and learn to accept it as a part of the gift of life. When we fail to look at death for what it is, an inseparable part of life, and do not live our lives accordingly, our thoughts and actions become disconnected from reality and so forth. Death as it actually occurs is part of the gift of life. It is our imminent end that gives life much of its sense of value and purpose. Death also represents renewal, regeneration, and continuity, and contemplating it in the proper light imbues us with the transformative qualities of understanding, acceptance, tolerance, hope, responsibility, and generosity. So we've all meditated on these qualities of death, hopefully, many, 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 many times. But I think also one of the teachings or the lessons of Geshe-la that I fully expected to take teachings him from another 20 years. I have questions lined up for him. Somebody, Venerable Sepul, I think, said she did too. Probably everyone has a list of questions for Geshe-la that will not be answered by Geshe-la in this life. And so this particular thing about it comes. Death comes, Shantideva tells us, that comes like a bolt of lightning out of the sky. We don't expect it. And there's no negotiating at the time that it comes. So there is something also in this teaching that I think all of us are ingesting, but I want to hold this as an example of the monastic mind, how thoroughly he understood what the inevitability was, how I'm sure actually he was very prepared for it. I did an interview with him on grief for the grief book that I've been promising to work on for 10 years. And he talked about how accepting this inevitability sort of precludes the need for grief. And that to follow his example of humility, in my mind, I know that whatever happened, he also took it with humility. That is the moment when you recognize it and you accept it because your mind is humble, imbued with the Buddhist worldview, and you're already dedicating to cultivating all of these good qualities. And if that is done, then regardless of whether we think we're going to have him another 20 years or whether it ends up being like that, it's okay. But what I need to do is to pay attention that I don't have another 20 years either. I mean, I really don't have 20 years. And I'd be lucky if I have 15. And I might be lucky if I have another day. So that calculation and paying attention to where I put my energy, to how carefully I wipe the tables, to how carefully I bring the reflections on emptiness and dependent arising and the generation of bodhicitta to my life, at this moment, that awareness is heightened. And if I can maintain that teaching, and I can follow the example of Geshe-la in the way he lived his monastic life, and the life that we lived with him, then I will still be able to grow in the Dharma until the last breath I have, which of course I intend to. But right now, the example is pretty vivid, and that teaching is so precious, so very, very precious. Yeah, I think one of the things that is most precious for me, and I've said this before, that all of his life, Geshe Dadul used his lay name. I guess that's done in the Tibetan tradition. Some people take their ordained names, and some people keep their lay names. But when he came to the Abbey and completely devoted his life now to living in a monastic environment after many, many, many years of not doing that, he took his ordained name and used that here. For me, that's another example of both a humility and his continued commitment himself to deepen in his monastic vows, in his way of being a monastic. And so that's another example and a way of teaching for me. So with gratitude to all of our teachers who embody this monastic mind, I who sure didn't come in with one, and hope I go out with one, with gratitude.